My name is Lily, I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how my own parents chose my brother's daughter over mine in the most shocking way possible. For years, I watched as little Emma, my 6-year-old niece, received all the attention, love, and resources while my daughter Sophie was treated like she was invisible. Every family gathering felt like a painful reminder that my child wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of the same love that Emma effortlessly received from my parents. The favoritism was so obvious that even strangers could see it, and it broke my heart every single day. But what happened next will completely change how you see family dynamics forever. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because you're going to want to hear every single detail of this story. Have you ever watched someone you love get treated unfairly while you felt powerless to stop it? Drop a comment below and let me know, because what I'm about to share might help you understand that sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most. I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll see why this story isn't just about favoritism. It's about something much deeper and more shocking. You might think you know where this is going, but trust me, you don't. This isn't just another story about grandparents playing favorites with their grandchildren. What I discovered about my parents' decision-making process was so unexpected that it made me question everything I thought I knew about my own childhood and my family's history. The truth behind their choice wasn't what anyone saw on the surface, and when I finally understood their reasoning, it changed my entire perspective on justice and forgiveness. I remember the exact moment when I realized that my daughter was being treated differently. It was Sophie's 5th birthday party, and while we were celebrating at home with a small cake, my parents had taken Emma to Disneyland for what they called a special grandmother-granddaughter bonding trip. The timing wasn't a coincidence, and that's when I knew I had to dig deeper into what was really happening. That birthday became the turning point that led me to uncover a family secret that had been buried for over 2 decades. But here's what nobody expected, not even me. Sometimes the people we think are the villains in our story are actually carrying burdens we never knew existed. Sometimes the favoritism we see isn't about love or preference. It's about guilt, regret, and choices made long before we even knew they mattered. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and the lengths people go to make amends for their past mistakes. Growing up, I always felt like I was living in my brother Michael's shadow, but I never imagined that shadow would extend to the next generation. When Michael and his wife Jessica had Emma, my parents transformed into these doting grandparents who would drop everything for a single phone call from their precious granddaughter. They bought her a car seat for their vehicle, converted their spare bedroom into a princess palace, and treated every one of her drawings like it belonged in the Louvre. Meanwhile, when Sophie was born 2 years later, they seemed politely interested at best, like she was a nice addition to the family, but not the main event. The contrast became impossible to ignore during family dinners and holidays. Emma would get the seat of honor next to Grandpa Tom, while Sophie would end up at the kids' table or forgotten in a corner with her coloring books. My mom, Carol, would spend hours playing dress-up and tea party with Emma, posting dozens of photos on Facebook with captions like, "My precious princess" and "Grandma's little angel." But with Sophie, the interactions felt forced and brief, like checking off a box on a to-do list rather than genuine joy in spending time together. I tried to rationalize it at first, telling myself that maybe Emma's outgoing personality made her easier to connect with. Sophie was quieter, more reserved, preferring books to games and deep conversations to small talk, even at her young age. But deep down, I knew personality wasn't the real issue because my parents had never shown favoritism this obvious before, not even between Michael and me as children. Something else was driving their behavior, something that made them feel obligated to shower Emma with attention while keeping Sophie at arm's length. The financial disparity was what finally pushed me to the breaking point. For Emma's 4th birthday, my parents bought her a custom-built playhouse for their backyard that cost more than most people's monthly rent. They hired a party planner, rented a bounce house, and invited half the neighborhood to celebrate their special girl. 6 months later, for Sophie's 4th birthday, they gave her a $20 gift card to Target and showed up an hour late to her party because they were helping Emma with a school project. The message was crystal clear. One granddaughter mattered, and the other was an afterthought. What made it even more painful was watching how this affected my relationship with Michael and Jessica. They started acting like they deserved this special treatment, like Emma was naturally more deserving of my parents' love and attention. Jessica would make passive-aggressive comments about how some children just have that special spark that grandparents connect with. Michael would defend our parents whenever I tried to bring up the obvious favoritism, saying things like, "Maybe Sophie just needs to be more outgoing," or "Emma has always been Dad's little princess." The family dynamic was becoming toxic, and I could see how it was starting to affect Sophie's self-esteem and confidence. Looking back now, I can see exactly how the favoritism started and why I didn't catch it sooner. It began so subtly that I actually convinced myself I was being paranoid or overly sensitive about normal grandparent behavior. When Emma was born, my parents were over the moon because she was their first grandchild, and I thought that explained their excitement and constant attention. They would drive 2 hours every weekend just to spend time with her, calling her their little miracle and treating every milestone like a world-changing event. I told myself that when Sophie came along, she would get the same treatment, but I was completely wrong. The shift became obvious when Sophie started reaching the same milestones that had made Emma so special. When Emma took her first steps, my parents threw a party and invited the entire extended family to celebrate this amazing achievement. They bought professional photography sessions, created a scrapbook, and Tom even took a day off work to be there for the big moment. But when Sophie took her first steps, my parents were too busy at one of Emma's dance recitals to even acknowledge it happened. Carol said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," over the phone and never mentioned it again. The pattern continued with every single achievement and moment that should have been celebrated equally. Emma's first word earned her a custom-made book with her picture on the cover, while Sophie's first word got a casual, cute response during a rushed phone conversation. When Emma started potty training, my parents bought her special princess underwear, a reward chart with gold stars, and threw a big girl party when she mastered it. Sophie got a generic pack of training pants from the grocery store and a half-hearted good job when she accomplished the same thing 6 months later. What hurt the most was realizing that my parents were creating two completely different standards for their granddaughters. Emma was encouraged to be bold, outgoing, and demanding of attention because every request was met with enthusiasm and immediate action. She learned that she was special, important, and deserving of the best things in life, because that's exactly how she was treated every single day. Meanwhile, Sophie was unconsciously learning that she needed to be grateful for scraps, that her achievements weren't worth celebrating, and that her presence wasn't as valuable or exciting as her cousins. The gradual nature of this favoritism made it even more insidious because it gave everyone time to normalize the inequality. Michael and Jessica started expecting special treatment as Emma's parents, assuming that their child deserved more resources and attention. My parents began justifying their behavior with excuses about Emma's personality or her special needs that somehow required constant spoiling and attention. By the time I fully recognized what was happening, the pattern was so established that challenging it felt like attacking a fundamental part of our family structure that everyone had agreed to accept except me. The constant favoritism didn't just affect Sophie, it completely destroyed my confidence as a mother and made me question everything about my parenting abilities. I started wondering if maybe there really was something wrong with my daughter, if perhaps she wasn't as lovable or special as Emma seemed to be to everyone else. Every family gathering became a source of anxiety and dread because I knew I would spend the entire time watching my child be overlooked and undervalued by the people who should love her unconditionally. The stress began affecting my marriage, my work performance, and even my relationship with Sophie herself because I was constantly overcompensating for my parents' lack of attention. If you've ever felt like you're fighting an uphill battle to protect someone you love, hit that subscribe button and like this video, because this story is about to show you that sometimes standing up for what's right requires more courage than you think you have. I found myself becoming hyper-vigilant at every family event, watching for signs of favoritism and mentally keeping score of every interaction. When Tom would spend 30 minutes reading Emma a bedtime story with different voices for every character, I would time how long he spent with Sophie, usually less than 5 minutes with a generic children's book read in a monotone voice. When Carol would post 5 photos of Emma on social media, with lengthy captions about her brilliant granddaughter, I would screenshot them as evidence of the disparity when Sophie's photos got posted weeks later with simple, cute kid captions. This constant documentation of inequality started consuming my thoughts and affecting every aspect of my daily life. I would lie awake at night replaying conversations and interactions, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meanings or subtle slights against my daughter. My husband David started getting frustrated with my obsession over my parents' behavior, telling me I was making mountains out of molehills, and that I should just focus on our own family happiness. But he didn't see what I saw because the favoritism was most obvious when the men weren't around. It was during the girl time moments when Carol would bond exclusively with Emma while ignoring Sophie completely. The worst part was watching how this treatment was shaping Sophie's personality and self-worth. She started becoming more withdrawn around my parents, automatically stepping back when Emma entered the room because she had learned that Emma's needs and wants would always take priority. Sophie began asking me questions like, "Why doesn't Grandma want to play with me?" And, "Am I not a good girl like Emma?" These conversations broke my heart because I couldn't explain to a 4-year-old that sometimes adults make unfair choices that have nothing to do with how wonderful and deserving she is. My relationship with Michael and Jessica became increasingly strained as I started pointing out the obvious disparities in treatment. They would get defensive and act like I was being jealous or competitive about our children, completely missing the point that this wasn't about sibling rivalry, it was about basic fairness and human decency. Jessica actually had the nerve to tell me that maybe I should work harder to help Sophie develop her social skills if I wanted her to connect better with my parents. That comment made me realize that the favoritism had become so normalized that even the adults were blaming Sophie for not being worthy of equal treatment. And that's when I knew something had to change dramatically. The turning point came during Sophie's 5th birthday party, and it wasn't just about the gifts or the attention. It was about a moment that made me realize I had been enabling this toxic dynamic for far too long. We had planned a small celebration at our house with close family, and I specifically asked my parents to make this day special for Sophie since she had been asking for weeks if Grandma and Grandpa would love my party like they love Emma's parties. I should have known something was wrong when they showed up 30 minutes late, but what happened next was so shocking that it finally gave me the courage to start digging for the truth. Carol walked in carrying a small wrapped gift for Sophie and a much larger, beautifully decorated present that she handed directly to Emma, explaining that it was an early birthday gift for her upcoming party next month. I watched my daughter's face fall as Emma unwrapped a brand new bicycle, while Sophie got a pack of generic crayons that looked like they came from the dollar store. Tom didn't even look at Sophie when she thanked him for the gift. He was too busy helping Emma figure out how to adjust the bike seat and praising her for being such a responsible big girl. The other kids at the party started gravitating toward Emma and her shiny new bike, leaving Sophie standing alone with her box of broken crayons that wouldn't even write properly. That's when I realized that my parents weren't just playing favorites. They were actively sabotaging Sophie's special moments to elevate Emma's status in the family. But the real shock came when I confronted Carol privately in the kitchen about bringing another child's gift to Sophie's birthday party. Instead of apologizing or showing any awareness of how inappropriate her behavior was, she got defensive and said something that stopped me cold. "Well, Emma has always been more special to us, Lily, and I think deep down you know why." The way she said it, with this knowing look in her eyes, made me realize that there was something much bigger happening here than simple grandparent favoritism. There was intention behind their choices, a deliberate reason for treating Sophie differently that went beyond personality preferences or natural bonding. That conversation haunted me for weeks because Carol's words suggested that there was some secret knowledge or family history that I wasn't aware of. I started paying attention to subtle comments and half-finished sentences that my parents would exchange when they thought no one was listening. During family dinners, I would catch Tom and Carol sharing meaningful glances when certain topics came up, and they would quickly change the subject whenever I tried to dig deeper into family stories or ask questions about our extended relatives. Something was being hidden from me, and whatever it was had everything to do with why Sophie was being treated like a second-class family member. The breakthrough came when I decided to stop playing by their rules and start investigating on my own. I began asking direct questions about family history, looking through old photo albums when I visited their house, and reaching out to relatives I hadn't spoken to in years to piece together information about our family's past. What I discovered was so unexpected and mind-blowing that it explained not just the favoritism toward Emma, but also why my own childhood had sometimes felt complicated in ways I could never quite understand. The truth was hiding in plain sight, but it took Sophie's birthday party disaster to give me the motivation to finally uncover it. After weeks of subtle investigation and growing suspicion, I decided it was time for a direct confrontation with my parents about their treatment of Sophie. I invited them over for dinner under the pretense of wanting to have a family conversation about making sure both grandchildren feel equally loved and supported. David thought I was being too aggressive, but I knew that dancing around the issue wasn't going to change anything, and Sophie deserved to have someone fight for her right to be treated fairly. I had prepared specific examples of their favoritism, documented instances of unequal treatment, and clear requests for how they could start making things right. But I wasn't prepared for how they would react when I finally laid out the truth about what I had been observing for years. Tom immediately went on the defensive, claiming that I was imagining problems that don't exist, and that they loved both granddaughters equally, just in different ways. Carol started crying and saying that I was being cruel and ungrateful for everything they had done for our family over the years. They both insisted that Emma just happened to be easier to connect with, and that Sophie was more independent, so she didn't need as much attention or support from her grandparents. Their gaslighting was so intense and immediate that for a moment I almost started doubting my own observations. But then I remembered Sophie's disappointed face at her birthday party and found the strength to push back harder. That's when the conversation took a turn that changed everything forever. I pulled out my phone and started showing them photos and social media posts that clearly demonstrated the disparity in treatment. Emma's elaborate birthday celebrations versus Sophie's ignored milestones, the expensive gifts versus the dollar store presents, the hours of devoted attention versus the casual dismissals. As the evidence mounted, Tom's face grew darker and Carol stopped crying and started looking genuinely angry instead of hurt. Finally, Carol stood up from the dinner table and said something that made my blood run cold. "Fine, Lily. You want to know the truth? Emma gets more because she deserves more, and Sophie gets what she gets because that's what's fair given the circumstances." The way she said circumstances with such venom and certainty made me realize that we had finally reached the heart of whatever secret they had been keeping from me. I demanded to know what circumstances she was talking about. What could possibly justify treating an innocent child differently because of something that had nothing to do with her personality or behavior? Tom tried to stop Carol from continuing, but she was too angry to back down now, and the truth that came out of her mouth next was so shocking that it made me question everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and even my own identity. The secret they revealed wasn't just about favoritism. It was about deception, lies, and choices that had been made years before Sophie was even born. What they told me that night didn't just explain the favoritism. It turned my entire world upside down and made me realize that Sophie and I had been living in a family built on lies and manipulation. The truth was so devastating and unexpected that I actually understood for the first time why they had been treating Sophie differently all along. But understanding their reasoning didn't make it right, and what I decided to do next would either heal our family forever or destroy it completely. That conversation was just the beginning of the most challenging and transformative period of my entire life. After that explosive dinner conversation with my parents, I spent 3 sleepless nights processing the truth they had finally revealed to me. The secret they had been keeping wasn't just shocking, it was life-altering in a way that forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, forgiveness, and justice. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work, and could barely look at Sophie without feeling this overwhelming mixture of protectiveness, anger, and heartbreak for what she had been unknowingly subjected to her entire life. David kept asking me what was wrong, but I wasn't ready to share what I had learned because I was still trying to figure out how to move forward with this information. The truth had given me answers, but it had also created a whole new set of impossible decisions about how to protect my daughter while dealing with the complicated reality of our family situation. If you've ever discovered that people you trusted have been lying to you for years, make sure you subscribe and hit that like button, because what I'm about to share next will show you how I found the strength to turn the most devastating family secret into an opportunity for healing and growth. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and fighting for what's right? Drop a comment and let me know, because this next part of my story is about finding courage you didn't know you had when the people you love need you to be stronger than you've ever been before. The first step in my healing process was accepting that my parents' behavior, while wrong, came from a place of pain and complicated emotions, rather than simple cruelty or favoritism. Understanding their motivation didn't excuse the damage they had caused to Sophie's self-esteem, but it helped me realize that this situation could potentially be resolved through honest communication and clear boundaries, rather than cutting them out of our lives completely. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and generational trauma, and she helped me understand that secrets like the one my parents had been keeping often create ripple effects that hurt multiple generations if they're not addressed properly. During those therapy sessions, I began to develop a plan for how to handle this situation in a way that would protect Sophie while also giving my parents an opportunity to make amends for their behavior. I realized that Sophie deserved to know the truth eventually, but in an age-appropriate way that wouldn't damage her relationship with her grandparents forever. I also understood that Michael and Jessica needed to be part of this conversation because Emma's treatment was connected to the same family secret, and continuing to hide the truth would only perpetuate the toxic dynamics that had been hurting everyone involved. The most important insight I gained during this period was that I had more power in this situation than I initially realized. Instead of being a victim of my parents' choices or a bystander to Sophie's mistreatment, I could become the catalyst for healing and positive change in our entire family system. I started setting clear boundaries about how Sophie would be treated at family events, having direct conversations with Michael and Jessica about the impact of the favoritism on both children. And most importantly, I began building Sophie's confidence and self-worth through intentional parenting that counteracted the messages she had been receiving from her grandparents. This wasn't going to be an overnight fix, but I finally had a roadmap for creating the kind of family environment that Sophie deserved to grow up in. Topic 8: The Journey to Independence and Empowerment. Armed with the truth about my family's secret and a clear understanding of why Sophie had been treated differently, I made the decision to take control of our situation, rather than remain a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I started by having age-appropriate conversations with Sophie about self-worth and the importance of knowing that her value didn't depend on how other people treated her, even if those people were family members who should know better. I enrolled her in activities where she could build confidence and develop her own sense of identity, separate from the toxic family dynamics we had been navigating for years. We started having special mother-daughter days where I would shower her with the attention and celebration she deserved, creating positive memories that would counteract the negative messages she had received from her grandparents. Most importantly, I began teaching her that sometimes the people we love make mistakes, and while we can forgive them, we don't have to accept poor treatment as normal or deserved. The next step was establishing firm boundaries with my parents about how Sophie would be treated moving forward, regardless of their feelings about the family secret they had revealed. I created a list of non-negotiable expectations: equal treatment at family events, equal gift-giving for birthdays and holidays, equal attention and engagement during visits, and absolutely no more comments or behaviors that suggested Sophie was less deserving of love than Emma. I told them that if they couldn't meet these basic standards of fairness, then Sophie and I would limit our participation in family gatherings until they could demonstrate consistent change in their behavior. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about protecting my daughter from further emotional harm while giving my parents a clear path to repair the damage they had caused. The conversation with Michael and Jessica was even more challenging because they had become so accustomed to their privileged status in the family hierarchy. When I explained the truth about why Emma had been receiving preferential treatment and demanded that they help ensure more equitable treatment for both children, Jessica became defensive and accused me of being jealous and trying to tear down Emma to make Sophie feel better. Michael was more understanding, but he struggled with the idea that Emma might lose some of her special privileges as we worked to create a more balanced family dynamic. I had to explain that this wasn't about taking anything away from Emma. It was about giving Sophie the same opportunities to feel loved and valued by her grandparents. Setting boundaries with family members while trying to maintain relationships is one of the most emotionally exhausting things I've ever had to do. There were moments when I questioned whether I was being too harsh or unreasonable, especially when my parents would get upset and accuse me of keeping their granddaughter away from them out of spite. But every time I wavered, I would remember Sophie's confused face at her birthday party, or her quiet questions about why Grandma didn't want to play with her, and I would find the strength to hold firm on my requirements. I realized that teaching Sophie to stand up for herself meant that I had to model that behavior, even when it was uncomfortable and difficult. The most liberating part of this entire process was discovering that I didn't need my parents' approval or validation to be a good mother and to create a loving environment for my daughter. For years, I had been seeking their acceptance and trying to earn the same treatment for Sophie that Emma received naturally, but that approach had only left us both feeling frustrated and inadequate. By focusing on building Sophie's confidence from within our own family unit and setting clear expectations for how others should treat her, I was able to create the foundation for her self-worth that no one else could shake or undermine. This shift in perspective changed everything about how we approached family relationships and gave us both the tools we needed to handle difficult situations with confidence and grace. The entire experience fundamentally changed my understanding of what family really means and what I'm willing to accept in the name of keeping the peace. I used to believe that family relationships were sacred and should be preserved at all costs, even if that meant tolerating unfair treatment or toxic behavior from relatives who should be sources of love and support. Through this journey with Sophie and my parents, I learned that real family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about people who consistently show up for you with love, respect, and genuine care for your well-being. Some of the most supportive family members in our lives turned out to be close friends who celebrated Sophie's achievements without reservation and never made her feel like she had to compete for their attention or affection. This revelation helped me reevaluate all of my relationships, not just the ones with my immediate family members. I started paying attention to how people made Sophie and me feel after spending time with them, and I made conscious decisions to invest more energy in relationships that were reciprocal, supportive, and emotionally healthy. I distanced myself from people who drained our energy or made us feel bad about ourselves, even if they were relatives or longtime family friends. This wasn't about cutting people out of our lives permanently, but rather about protecting our emotional well-being while we healed from the damage that had been done and built stronger foundations for healthy relationships. The impact on Sophie was immediate and profound once we started prioritizing relationships that made her feel valued and celebrated for who she was. She became more outgoing and confident, willing to try new activities and speak up for herself when something didn't feel right. Her grades improved at school, and she started forming deeper friendships with classmates who appreciated her quiet, thoughtful personality rather than expecting her to compete for their attention. Most importantly, she stopped asking those heartbreaking questions about why she wasn't good enough for her grandparents because she was surrounded by people who clearly demonstrated her worth through their actions and words. I also learned the difference between forgiveness and acceptance, which became crucial for moving forward in a healthy way with my parents. I could forgive them for the mistakes they had made and the favoritism they had shown, understanding that their behavior came from their own unresolved issues and complicated feelings about the family secret. But forgiveness didn't mean I had to accept continued poor treatment or pretend that their behavior hadn't caused real harm to Sophie's self-esteem. I could maintain a relationship with them while still enforcing boundaries that protected my daughter from further emotional damage. Learning to forgive my parents for the years of favoritism they had shown wasn't about excusing their behavior or pretending that the damage hadn't been real and significant. Instead, it was about freeing myself and Sophie from the burden of carrying anger and resentment that was poisoning our ability to move forward and build the kind of life we deserved. The forgiveness process took months of therapy, honest conversations, and a lot of internal work to separate my parents' actions from my own self-worth and Sophie's inherent value as a person. I had to learn that forgiving them didn't mean I had to forget what happened or allow the same patterns to continue in the future. If you've ever struggled with forgiving family members who have hurt you or your children, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like this video because what I'm about to share will show you how forgiveness can actually be an act of strength rather than weakness. The hardest part of the forgiveness process was accepting that my parents were flawed human beings who had made serious mistakes rather than the perfect, all-knowing figures I had built them up to be in my mind since childhood. I had to grieve the loss of the relationship I thought we had, and the grandparents I had hoped they would be for Sophie, while simultaneously working to build a new relationship, based on realistic expectations and clear boundaries. This meant acknowledging that they might never fully understand the impact of their favoritism or take complete responsibility for the harm they had caused, but that Sophie and I could still have a relationship with them if they were willing to change their behavior moving forward. Self-respect became the foundation for everything else in this healing process, because I realized that I had been seeking validation from people who had consistently shown me that they weren't capable of providing it in a healthy way. Instead of trying to prove Sophie's worthiness to my parents, I focused on building her confidence from within our own family unit and surrounding her with people who naturally celebrated her achievements and personality. I stopped making excuses for my parents' behavior to other family members, stopped pretending that their treatment was normal or acceptable, and started speaking honestly about the impact their favoritism had on both Sophie and our family relationships. The breakthrough came when I realized that forgiveness was actually a gift I was giving to myself and Sophie, rather than something my parents had earned or deserved through their actions. Carrying anger and hurt was exhausting and was preventing us from fully enjoying the positive relationships and experiences we were building outside of the toxic family dynamics. By choosing to forgive, I was choosing to focus my energy on creating joy and stability for Sophie, rather than trying to get justice or acknowledgement from people who might never be capable of providing either one in a meaningful way. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to model healthy boundary setting and self-advocacy for Sophie, by showing her that we could maintain relationships with people who had hurt us, while still protecting ourselves from further harm. I explained to her that loving someone doesn't mean accepting poor treatment from them, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to have honest conversations about how their behavior affects us. This lesson became the foundation for all of her future relationships, and gave her the tools she needed to navigate difficult social situations with confidence and grace throughout her childhood and beyond. After months of therapy, boundary setting, and family drama, the moment finally came when my parents were ready to share the complete truth about why they had been treating Sophie differently from Emma all these years. What they revealed wasn't just shocking, it was so unexpected that it completely changed my understanding of our entire family history, and made me realize that sometimes the people we think are acting out of favoritism are actually carrying secrets that are too painful and complicated to share. The truth had been hiding in plain sight for Sophie's entire life. But it took a crisis in our family relationships to finally bring it into the open, where it could be addressed and healed. I need to warn you that what I'm about to share is going to sound unbelievable, but every word of this story is true, and it will change how you think about family secrets and the lengths people go to protect the ones they love. The secret my parents had been keeping wasn't about favoritism toward Emma or dislike of Sophie. It was about guilt, responsibility, and a mistake they had made years before either child was born. When I was pregnant with Sophie, my parents had made a promise to someone very important in our family's history, and that promise had shaped every interaction they'd had with my daughter since the day she was born. Michael wasn't Sophie's biological uncle, and Emma wasn't her biological cousin. They were actually her half-siblings, children of the same father who had abandoned our family when I was just a teenager. My parents had been treating Sophie differently because they knew the truth about her parentage, and they were trying to protect her from a painful family secret while honoring a deathbed promise they had made to my biological father. The man I had always believed was my father, Tom, had actually adopted me when I was 3 years old after my biological father left our family for another woman. That woman was Michael's mother, and when she died in a car accident 10 years later, my biological father reached out to my parents and asked them to help raise Michael because he wasn't capable of being a single parent. My parents agreed, but only on the condition that Michael would never know the truth about his connection to our family, and that they would treat him as their own son rather than as my half-brother. This arrangement worked for years until Michael grew up and had Emma, creating a situation where my parents' granddaughter was actually my biological niece, but nobody was supposed to know or acknowledge this connection. When Sophie was born, my biological father was dying of cancer, and he made my parents promise that they would make sure his granddaughter was taken care of, but that they would never reveal the truth about the family connections because it would destroy the relationships Michael and I had built as siblings. The favoritism toward Emma wasn't about preference. It was about my parents trying to maintain equal treatment for their biological granddaughter and their step-granddaughter while honoring a dying man's wish to keep his family secrets buried. They had been giving Emma extra attention and resources because she was actually their step-granddaughter, while Sophie was their biological granddaughter, and they were trying to balance the scales without revealing the truth that would have turned our entire family upside down. The most shocking part of this revelation was realizing that Sophie wasn't the outsider in our family. She was actually the most direct descendant of my biological father, making her more closely related to my parents than Emma had ever been. The favoritism I had been fighting against was actually my parents' misguided attempt to compensate for a family secret that they thought was protecting everyone involved. When they finally told me the truth, I understood why they had been so conflicted about their treatment of both girls, why certain conversations had always felt strained and incomplete, and why there had been so many meaningful glances and half-finished sentences whenever family history came up in conversation. This revelation didn't excuse the years of emotional damage that had been done to Sophie's self-esteem, but it helped me understand that my parents' behavior had come from a place of love and confusion rather than favoritism or rejection. The real tragedy was that their attempt to honor a dying man's wishes had actually created the exact kind of family dysfunction and pain that the secret was supposed to prevent. Sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction, and sometimes the people we think are hurting us are actually trying to protect us in ways that we can't understand until all the pieces of the puzzle finally come together. After learning the truth about my family's complicated history and the reasons behind my parents' favoritism, I had to completely redefine what justice and healing looked like in our situation. The anger and resentment I had been carrying for years suddenly felt misplaced, but the damage to Sophie's self-esteem was still very real and needed to be addressed regardless of my parents' good intentions. I realized that justice wasn't going to come from punishing my parents for keeping family secrets or making them pay for the years of confusion and hurt they had caused through their misguided attempts at protection. Instead, justice meant creating a new family dynamic where honesty, transparency, and equal treatment became the foundation for all of our relationships moving forward. This shift in perspective was both liberating and challenging because it required me to let go of the victim narrative I had been carrying while still advocating for the changes that Sophie deserved. The healing process became much more complex once I understood that everyone in our family had been hurt by the secrets and lies, not just Sophie and me. My parents had been carrying the burden of a dying man's wishes for over a decade, trying to honor promises they had made while watching their actions cause pain to people they loved deeply. Michael had been living his entire adult life without knowing the truth about his connection to our family, and Emma had been receiving preferential treatment that was actually creating an artificial sense of superiority that could harm her relationships in the future. The real work wasn't about assigning blame or seeking revenge. It was about figuring out how to move forward together with honesty and authenticity while healing the wounds that had been created by years of secrecy. I started approaching the situation with curiosity rather than anger, asking questions about how we could create better communication patterns and more equitable treatment for both children without completely destroying the family relationships we had all been working to preserve. This meant having difficult conversations with Michael about the truth of our biological connection, helping Emma understand why some of the privileges she had been receiving needed to be redistributed more fairly, and working with my parents to develop new ways of showing love and support that didn't involve maintaining harmful secrets or creating artificial disparities between the children. The most important lesson I learned during this phase was that healing doesn't always look like the justice we think we deserve, but it can be even more powerful when it focuses on creating positive change for everyone involved. Instead of demanding apologies or punishment for past mistakes, I channeled my energy into building the kind of family environment where future secrets wouldn't be necessary, and where both children could feel equally valued and supported. This approach required more patience and emotional maturity than seeking revenge would have, but it created lasting changes that benefited everyone in our family, rather than just addressing my own need for vindication. The transformation in our family dynamics was gradual but profound, once we all committed to honesty and equal treatment as our guiding principles. Sophie began receiving the same level of attention and celebration for her achievements that Emma had always enjoyed, and both children started developing a healthier understanding of their place in the family hierarchy. My parents found relief in no longer having to maintain complicated lies and artificial treatment differences, and Michael and I were able to build a new relationship based on the truth of our shared history, rather than the fiction we had been living our entire adult lives. The healing process taught me that sometimes the most powerful form of justice is the courage to build something better from the ruins of what was broken. The moment came when I had to make a decision about whether to tell Sophie and Emma the truth about their real relationship and the reasons behind the years of unequal treatment they had experienced. This wasn't just about family transparency. It was about giving both children the information they needed to understand their own identities and make sense of the confusing dynamics they had been navigating their entire lives. I knew that revealing the truth would change everything about how they saw their family, their connection to each other, and their place in our extended network of relationships. But I also knew that continuing to hide the truth would perpetuate the same patterns of secrecy and confusion that had already caused so much damage to everyone involved. If you're facing a situation where you have to choose between protecting someone with lies or empowering them with difficult truths, make sure you subscribe and hit that like button, because this part of my story will show you how honesty can be the most loving choice even when it's the most frightening one. The conversation with both children happened during a family meeting that included Michael, Jessica, my parents, David, and me, everyone who had been affected by the family secret, and everyone who would be part of creating our new dynamic moving forward. I explained the truth in age-appropriate terms, focusing on the love and intention behind the adults' choices, while acknowledging that mistakes had been made, and that everyone was committed to doing better in the future. Sophie and Emma listened with the kind of intense concentration that children reserve for information that fundamentally changes their understanding of their world, and their questions were thoughtful, direct, and sometimes heartbreaking in their innocence. The most surprising part of their reaction was how quickly they adapted to the new information and how readily they embraced their actual relationship as half-sisters rather than cousins. Sophie actually seemed relieved to finally have an explanation for why she had always felt different around my parents, and Emma was excited about having a real sister, rather than just a cousin she occasionally played with at family gatherings. The children's resilience and acceptance taught me that sometimes adults complicate situations far more than necessary, by assuming that children can't handle difficult truths when presented with love and support. The real work began after the initial conversation, when we had to rebuild our family traditions, holidays, and everyday interactions based on honesty, rather than the elaborate fiction we had been maintaining for years. This meant equal birthday celebrations, equal gift-giving, equal attention from grandparents, and most importantly, equal respect for both children's feelings and experiences as they processed their new understanding of their family history. My parents had to learn new ways of showing love that didn't involve the guilt-driven overcompensation they had been practicing with Emma, and Michael and Jessica had to adjust their expectations about their daughter's place in the family hierarchy. The resolution wasn't perfect or immediate, but it was authentic in a way that our family relationships had never been before. Both children began flourishing in the new environment of honesty and equality, developing confidence in their own worth rather than wondering why they were being treated differently for reasons no one would explain. My parents found peace in being able to express their love without the burden of maintaining secrets. And Michael and I discovered that our relationship actually became stronger once it was built on truth, rather than the artificial sibling dynamic we had been maintaining. The final lesson was that sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most healing outcomes, and that children are often more capable of handling complex truths than adults give them credit for when those truths are presented with love, support, and a commitment to positive change moving forward. The journey through this family crisis taught me lessons about love, honesty, and resilience that I never could have learned any other way. And these insights became the foundation for the kind of parent I wanted to be and the kind of family environment I was determined to create for Sophie moving forward. The most important realization was that protecting someone you love doesn't always mean shielding them from difficult truths. Sometimes it means giving them the information and support they need to understand their world and develop the strength to handle whatever challenges come their way. Sophie's transformation from a confused, withdrawn child who wondered why she wasn't good enough for her grandparents into a confident, secure little girl who understood her place in our family was proof that honesty, even when it's painful, can be the most loving gift we give to the people we care about most. The experience also taught me that family isn't just about blood relationships or traditional roles. It's about the people who show up consistently with love, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I learned to value transparency over peacekeeping, which was a complete shift from how I had been raised to handle family conflicts and uncomfortable situations. Growing up, the unspoken rule in our household was that we didn't discuss anything that might create tension or require difficult conversations, which is exactly how the family secret about Sophie's parentage was able to fester and cause damage for so many years. As a parent, I made the conscious decision to create an environment where Sophie could ask any question and receive an honest, age-appropriate answer, where her feelings were validated even when they were inconvenient, and where she never had to wonder if there were important things about her life or identity that were being hidden from her. The experience also taught me the difference between healthy boundaries and harmful secrets, which became crucial for maintaining relationships with extended family members while protecting Sophie from further emotional damage. Healthy boundaries meant saying no to family events where Sophie might be treated unfairly, having direct conversations about our expectations for equal treatment, and removing ourselves from situations that felt toxic or damaging to our well-being. Harmful secrets, on the other hand, were the kind of hidden information that created confusion, inequality, and emotional pain for innocent children who deserved to understand their place in the family structure and feel equally valued by the adults in their lives. Perhaps the most valuable lesson was learning to trust my instincts as a mother, an advocate for my child even when other people thought I was being too sensitive or making too big a deal out of family dynamics. There were countless moments during this journey when relatives, friends, and even David suggested that I should just accept the favoritism as normal grandparent behavior and focus on building Sophie's self-esteem in other ways. But I knew that allowing her to grow up believing she was less worthy of love and attention than her cousin would damage her ability to form healthy relationships and advocate for herself throughout her life. Standing up for Sophie taught her to stand up for herself, and that lesson became more valuable than any gift or special treatment she could have received from her grandparents. The new family values we established prioritized authenticity, equality, open communication, and mutual respect over traditional hierarchies, keeping the peace or maintaining appearances. These values became the filter through which we made decisions about everything from holiday celebrations to everyday interactions with extended family members. Sophie learned that she had the right to be treated fairly, the right to ask questions about her life and family history, and the right to remove herself from situations where she felt disrespected or undervalued. These lessons gave her a strong foundation for navigating all of her future relationships with confidence and self-respect, knowing that she deserved to be surrounded by people who celebrated her achievements and valued her presence in their lives. As I look back on this entire journey, from that heartbreaking Christmas morning when Sophie received a coloring book while Emma got a bicycle, to the family meeting where we finally revealed the truth about their real relationship, I'm amazed at how much growth and healing can come from the most painful family situations when we approach them with courage, honesty, and a commitment to doing what's right rather than what's easy. Sophie is now a confident, secure child who knows exactly where she fits in our family structure and never has to wonder if she's worthy of love and attention from the adults in her life. The relationship with my parents has been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and equal treatment. And while it took time and effort from everyone involved, it's now stronger and more authentic than it ever was when it was based on secrets and artificial dynamics. If you've stuck with me through this entire story and found inspiration in our family's journey from dysfunction to healing, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because sharing these experiences is how we help each other navigate the complex challenges of family relationships and parenting. The most unexpected outcome of this entire experience was discovering that Michael and I actually have a closer, more genuine relationship, now that it's based on the truth of our shared biological father, rather than the artificial sibling dynamic we had been maintaining our entire adult lives. Understanding our real connection helped explain some of the complicated feelings and interactions we'd had over the years, and it gave us a foundation for building a healthier relationship that benefits both of our children. Emma and Sophie have embraced their relationship as half-sisters with enthusiasm and joy, and watching them play together without the artificial hierarchy that used to define their interactions has been one of the most rewarding aspects of this whole journey. The experience taught me that sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most beautiful destinations, and that fighting for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable and challenging, creates lasting change that benefits everyone involved, rather than just addressing surface-level problems. Sophie will grow up knowing that she has a mother who will advocate for her when she can't advocate for herself, who will seek the truth even when it's complicated and painful, and who values her well-being more than keeping the peace or maintaining comfortable lies. These lessons will serve her throughout her life as she encounters people and situations that require her to stand up for herself and make difficult choices about the kind of relationships she wants to maintain. If you're currently dealing with favoritism, family secrets, or toxic dynamics that are affecting your children, I want you to know that change is possible, but it requires courage, persistence, and a willingness to prioritize your child's emotional well-being over other people's comfort with the status quo. Sometimes the people we think are the villains in our story are actually carrying burdens and secrets that explain their behavior, but understanding their motivation doesn't mean we have to accept harmful treatment or allow our children to suffer because of adult complications they had nothing to do with creating. Trust your instincts, advocate for your children, and don't be afraid to have difficult conversations that lead to positive change. The journey from discovering favoritism to uncovering family secrets to rebuilding relationships based on honesty and equality wasn't easy, but it was absolutely worth every uncomfortable conversation, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt I experienced along the way. Sophie now has the kind of family environment she deserves, where she's celebrated for who she is rather than compared to other children, where her questions are answered honestly, and where she never has to wonder if there are important things about her life that are being hidden from her. That security and confidence will be her foundation for navigating all of her future relationships. And knowing that I was able to give her that gift makes every challenge we face during this process feel meaningful and worthwhile.